The beginning of the story shows two men from Ecuador who are migrating to the border of America and Mexico. Then they both join other immigrants, then ask for mercy from every passing car, hoping to be given a job. Not long after, one of the two men was called by an American and hired as a construction worker, while his friend, named Felix, wasn't called because the American only needed one person. As a result, Felix had to part with his friend. After that, Felix approached the supermarket door and begged one of the customers to give him a job. However, the customer didn't need a worker, so he refused Felix. In fact, Felix was even kicked out by the supermarket employees because he was considered disturbing the visitors. Then Felix came to an old man named Alfonso who was eating on a pickup truck. Here, Felix tries to greet Alfonso and asks him for a job. However, Alfonso replied that he also needed a job because no one had rented his car since morning. It turns out that Alfonso always rents out his pickup car to anyone who needs his services. At the same time, Felix, who was thirsty but had no money, was desperate to enter the supermarket and get water from the Westival there. But Felix was again kicked out by supermarket employees who considered Felix a vagrant. Fortunately, there was a man who claimed to be Felix's friend, and the man immediately took Felix around looking for food in the supermarket. Here Felix and the man got acquainted, whose name turned out to be Donnie. Felix thanked Donnie for helping him just now. Then Donnie explained that he needed two workers, and each of them would be paid $150. The job is quite easy, which is just to dig a patch of land for Donnie. And if Felix agrees, then they can start working right now. But Felix had to find one more person. Hearing this, of course Felix wanted to, and instantly he remembered Alfonso, the man he had met in the supermarket parking lot. Felix quickly went to Alfonso and asked him to work for $150. Alfonso refused at first, as he was used to getting paid $170 a day. But Felix promised to give him an extra $30 from his wages, as long as Alfonso agreed to work with him. In the end, Alfonso agreed. They set off following Donnie's car. On the way, Felix told that he already had a wife waiting for him to come home. She hoped he would come home with a lot of money, because they wanted to open a restaurant in Ecuador. Hearing this, Alfonso only said that he hoped Felix would succeed. In short order, Felix and Alfonso had arrived in a desert, and Donnie immediately marked the ground they had to dig. It turned out that Donnie wasn't alone, but accompanied by a friend who was just waiting in the car. Still aren't told who Donnie really is and why he asked Felix to dig the ground. Then Felix and Alfonso started digging the ground according to what Donnie wanted. 30 minutes later, they were approached by a cowboy riding a horse. The cowboy asked why they were digging here, since it was the cowboy's land. Donnie cheekily replied that all the land from California to New York was his, so he was free to do anything on the land. Of course, the cowboy was angry and pointed his gun at Donnie. But suddenly, the cowboy was shot dead by Donnie's partner, who was in the car. It turns out that Donnie and one of his friends are gangsters who have robbed $5 million from a cartel group called Zetas. Meanwhile, the land that Felix and Alfonso dug up was to bury the 4 Zetas cartel members they had killed. And now it had grown to 5 people, with the cowboy who had just been shot by Donnie's partner. Realizing this, Felix and Alfonso could only keep silent because they were now working with the wrong people. On the other hand, it shows a man who is cycling. But suddenly he stopped at a warehouse because he peed. Here, the man must be shocked because in the warehouse there are several bodies that have long been dead. Then the man was approached by a man with no name, played by Tyrese Gibson. To make it easier for us, let's call him Gibson, who claimed to be a police detective. Gibson asked the man to stay away from the warehouse. But suddenly Gibson finished off the man. It turns out that Gibson is the right hand of the Zetas cartel boss, who is hunting Donnie and his friend for robbing $5 million and killing 4 of his members. Behind it, Donnie and his friend are removing the bodies of 4 Zetas cartel members. Then they asked Felix and Alfonso to bury them immediately. Not long after, Alfonso suddenly attacked Donnie and his friend, leading to a fight between Alfonso and the 2 criminals. In the end, Alfonso managed to make Donnie and his friend unconscious, Before leaving, Alfonso had stolen the Rolex watch worn by Donnie's friend named Steve Hoskins, and after that he invited Felix to leave immediately. But suddenly Donnie shot at Felix and Alfonso, until they had to avoid the shot by riding Donnie's car. But fortunately, Alfonso and Felix managed to escape, even though Felix's leg had to be shot. On the way, Alfonso stopped by a fuel station to fill up. Then he asked Felix to wait in the car, while he would buy new clothes in the minimarket. When Alfonso went inside, Felix accidentally found a wad of money in the car seat he was sitting on. It turns out that the car Felix and Alfonso are using now is Donnie's car, while all the money is money that Donnie and his friends robbed from members of the Zetas cartel. Unbeknownst to Alfonso, Felix immediately put all the money into his bag, which amounted to almost $1 million. Soon, Alfonso arrives, and they head straight to Alfonso's best friend's garage to change the car and treat the gunshot wound on Felix's leg. On the other hand, Hoskins is shown to have survived as well. The friend quickly woke up Donnie, who was badly injured by Alfonso's stabbing. Here, the friend asks Donnie that they should immediately go after Felix and Alfonso, who have taken away his car, because in the car they have $5 million of stolen money from Zetas cartel members. But before that, Donnie begs his friend to take him to the doctor first, to treat the wound on his chest. The scene returns to Alfonso and Felix, who have just arrived at Alfonso's old friend's workshop. However, the friend doesn't open the gate, so Alfonso intends to break the lock of the gate. But suddenly, there was a gunshot that quite amazed Alfonso. It turned out to be Alfonso's old friend named Rob. Rob was immediately surprised when he saw Alfonso, because he thought that Alfonso had died a long time ago. It was revealed that Alfonso used to be a former hitman who never failed when carrying out missions. Even so great, Alfonso was given the nickname God Killer. Then Alfonso borrowed Rob's car, because the car he was using now seemed unsafe. Alfonso also asked Rob to contact a doctor to treat the gunshot wound in Felix's leg. Not long after, Rob managed to contact the doctor, and the doctor asked Felix to be taken to his clinic immediately. Without thinking, Alfonso immediately took Felix to the doctor's clinic using a car borrowed from Rob. Meanwhile, the car that Alfonso stole from Donnie, he handed over to Rob, and Rob should just destroy the car. On the way, until now Alfonso had not realized that Felix had hidden the $1 million found in Donnie's car earlier. Felix himself doesn't want to let go of his bag, because that's where Felix keeps his $1 million. In short, Alfonso and Felix had arrived at the clinic. Here, Alfonso asked the doctor to immediately remove the bullet that was in Felix's leg. At the same time, Rob suddenly called Alfonso and asked him to come back, because there was something left behind. In the end, Alfonso left Felix with the doctor, and he promised to return soon. Alfonso also gave Hoskins some money and the Rolex watch he had stolen earlier as a reward for the doctor. After Alfonso left, the doctor began to take action Felix's leg. A few minutes later, a freshly operated Felix was seen. The doctor suggested that Felix should wait in the next room until Alfonso returned to pick him up. On the other hand, Alfonso himself has now just arrived at Rob's workshop. Here, Rob says that he just destroyed the car that Alfonso stole from Donnie. It turned out that in all the seats of the car, there was money totaling $4 million. But only in the seat that Felix sit was there no money. That means Felix had taken the money and moved it into his bag. Hearing this, of course, Alfonso felt disrespected by Felix, because Felix should have told him this from the start, instead of hiding it. Alfonso quickly returned to the clinic to look for Felix. The scene returns to Felix calling his cousin using the doctor's landline. It turns out that Felix's cousin lives in America, and now he asks for the cousin's detailed address, because Felix is going to his house. After getting his cousin's address, without Felix realizing it, Hoskins is already outside bringing Donnie to be treated by the doctor as well. At first, the doctor refuses to treat Donnie, as he is now closed. However, Donnie's friend confronted the doctor, so inevitably, the doctor immediately took him to the operating room. Behind that, Felix just realized that the doctor had Donnie and his friend, until he quickly tried to leave the place. At the same time, Hoskins continued to force the doctor to resuscitate Donnie. The doctor was uncomfortable, so he tried to fight back. The doctor secretly took a gun in his drawer, and when he wanted to shoot Hoskins, he was shot first. In the end, the doctor had to die because shot by Hoskins. Here, Hoskins accidentally saw his Rolex watch that was previously taken by Alfonso. Hoskins finally realized that Alfonso and Felix must have just sought treatment at this place, and the watch is a payment for the doctor. Not long after, Donnie woke up from consciousness, and he immediately asked where they were now. The friend replied that they were at the clinic, and he had just saved Donnie's life. In return, the friend asked Donnie to immediately pursue Felix and Alfonso to retrieve the $5 million. Meanwhile, the friend would rest in this place. Donnie, who felt humiliated because he had been ordered, immediately shot his friend without thinking. On the other hand, it shows Felix, who is still in the front room and tries to escape. However, his leg gave out again, so he had to walk on all fours. Not long after, Donnie chased Felix, until finally Felix had to be caught by Donnie. Here, Felix asks for forgiveness and promises to return the $1 million in his bag, as he only took that part of it. But Donnie didn't want to, because what he wanted was all the $5 million, not $1 million. Felix swears that if he doesn't know where the rest of the money is, then Donnie will finish Felix off. But suddenly, Donnie was attacked from behind, leaving him dead. It turned out to be Gibson, a man with no name, the right-hand man of the Zetas cartel group, whose money Donnie and his friend robbed. After that, Gibson interrogates Felix by asking where the rest $4 million is, because it belongs to the Zetas cartel. Felix swears that he only found $1 million under the seat of Donnie's car, and the rest Felix doesn't know where. Gibson also asked where the car was now, because he was sure that the rest of the money was still in the car. Felix replied that the car had been destroyed by Rob, Alfonso's best friend. Hearing this, Gibson immediately dragged Felix to be delivered to Rob's place, because he was sure that the $4 million was now in the hands of Rob and Alfonso. A few minutes after Gibson left with Felix, Alfonso arrived at the clinic. However, he only found the doctor and the dead Hoskins. At the same time, Rob called Felix and asked him to come back immediately, because now Rob had a guest, that is Gibson, the right-hand man of the Zetas cartel group. Hearing this, Alfonso immediately returned to Rob's place. In short, Rob immediately shot at Gibson's car. But unfortunately, he didn't find Gibson and only heard the voice of Felix, who was locked in the trunk of his car. When he came out, Felix said that Gibson had hidden in the other car. And suddenly, there was a shootout between the two. As a result, Rob had to be shot dead by Gibson. Then Gibson put Felix in the trunk of the car, while he would look for his $4 million in Rob workshop. When inside, Gibson immediately looked for the money in every room and rummaged through the items there. But Gibson didn't find the money, because Rob had hidden it in a secret place. And now, only Alfonso knew the place. Not long after, Alfonso arrived, and he immediately approached Rob, who was lying lifeless. Then Gibson came up to Alfonso while throwing a bag of $1 million stolen by Felix. Gibson asked Alfonso to tell him where all the money was, if Alfonso still wanted to live. Alfonso promised to tell him where the money was as long as Gibson exchanged it with Felix. Although he was disappointed with Felix, Alfonso still cared, because when he saw Felix, Alfonso was like seeing his own brother. Not long after, Gibson took out Felix in the trunk of the car while pointing a gun at him. Then Alfonso approached while saying that he had killed the top brass of the Zetas cartel group with his own hand, so that to finish Gibson is not a difficult thing, because Alfonso is a former hitman nicknamed God Killer. However, Gibson wasn't afraid of the bluff and continued to stab Felix. In the end, Alfonso asked Gibson to release Felix first, and only then would he tell him where all the remaining money was kept. With no other choice, Gibson finally let Felix go. But because he refused, Gibson was finally hit by Alfonso, making him to fall. Without thinking, Alfonso immediately shot Gibson, who was already helpless. After Gibson died, Felix immediately apologized to Alfonso for hiding $1 million in his bag. However, Alfonso didn't mind this. Even now, Alfonso gave all the money to Felix. Alfonso asked Felix to return to Ecuador and open a restaurant with his wife, just as Felix had envisioned. Meanwhile, Alfonso himself was going to stay here, because he was sure that another group of Zetas cartels would be arriving soon. Hearing all this, Felix immediately hugged Alfonso and thanked him profusely. Then Felix drove off with all the money in Rob's car. In the morning, seeing Alfonso still staying, breathing in the fresh air, and enjoying a cigarette. It wasn't long before the rest of the Zetas cartel arrived, and immediately surrounded Alfonso. Deliberately, Alfonso didn't put up the slightest resistance, until he was immediately shot by them. Apparently, Alfonso did all this as a form of penance for his past sins, when he was still a hitman. Then the movie ended.